I can hear it. It's in the walls.
Walt, it's the rats, like my pet ones. That's their playground. It's fine.
In the walls?
Well, it wasn't in the walls originally, but, beef is never more than 1 centimeter away from freedom.
Are you sure? What about that moaning sound?
That is the next door neighbor. Their Pilates room is the one that borders with ours. He told me that the other day.
I'll never understand how you just talk to them.
Well, it's the British sensibility.
Okay, now wait a minute. That definitely doesn't sound right.
Well, yeah, that I haven't heard before.
Where is that coming from? It's moving this way. This wall, down, north, and... there! Oh, it is beef. Has he got a helmet with a microphone?
Yeah, how else is he going to tell me he loves me? So, just a quick update, because I haven't talked to you about this in a while. So,
Sure.
there is a real life context for why there is a world where my pet rats are escaping, because my pet rat Beef is escaping a lot. He's now learned, I'm not kidding, you know the layout of my house, how to get on top of the fridge.
What?
He got behind the fridge the other day, and it's fine. There's not like any exposed wiring or anything.
Yeah.
But he, how parkour artists use like 2 walls and squish between them and climb up.
That's how he does it?
What? There's literally no grate. There's no other way. It's a flat bit of metal behind the fridge. I'm like, there is no other way he would be able to climb up that other than like Spider-Maning it between 2
Are we
walls.
sure he doesn't have a very small pair of those gloves that Tom Cruise uses in
From
Mission
Mission
Impossible? He's climbing up. I say a pair. 2 pairs of those gloves.
Yes. He's so, brave. It's unbelievable.
I love that. Welcome to the Get Commanded podcast. It's the GCP, brought to you by POG, Palms Off Gaming, sponsor of this podcast, displaying all of the soup brands except for Campbell's. I'm your host, Walt.
What's your beef with Campbell's soup?
Beef? No, there's no beef in Campbell's soup.
Oh, I hope not. He's a good rat. Hello, Commander players. And just like your dad, I'm just resting my eyes, James.
Real. It's 8:30 in the morning where we are right now.
I'm assuming your dad has said that before. I feel like it's a rite of passage for all
Dad
dads.
can't nap. Straight up.
No, that's just not a thing.
Can't do it. I suspect, wonder where I got that anxiety from.
Oh, okay. This is generic. I wonder where I got my narcolepsy from. There. Because my dad is a serial napper.
Right,
100%.
there you go. Look, you might have seen in our Discord, but we did announce we are going to be taking a very small break.
Yeah.
So after this episode comes out for all of you, there will be 2 Fridays in a row, or Thursdays, depending on where you are in the world, where there will not be an episode, and 2 Mondays where there will not be a stream. That said, on the 16th, so immediately, the Monday, hold on.
No. We'll already have done that.
Oh.
I realized I put this in the notes for this episode, but that'll already be passed. But you can go on our Twitch channel and check out the VOD for it.
Yes, go
you
watch the
can do
VOD,
that.
because we will have played with Attack on Cardboard.
Yeah, we love Attack on Cardboard. I've been obsessed with your YouTube channel for a while now, just because it's so rules-based and lots of really intricate stuff explained. But
great editing too. Really short, concise, 9-minute videos sometimes. And it's like, that is how long it takes me to eat my breakfast. That is perfect.
It's something that Walt and I are watching to learn from for future content.
Jealous, honestly.
But yeah, look, this little short hiatus that Walt and I are taking, it was a big decision because we are now on episode 108 and we haven't missed, there was 1 week for Christmas that we missed a week.
Yes.
But other than that, we have been doing an episode every single week since episode 11.
Yes.
And we haven't missed
14 with their deck building.
Oh, that's
14,
so
15,
true.
16.
Yeah, 14,
yeah.
15, 16.
But yes, it's still
not missed a week.
About 100 weeks in a row that we had. Yeah, that 1 week off for Christmas, and then that's been it. So yeah, don't get alarmed. We are doing this because we can feel that we're getting a bit tired, and we know that if we take 2 weeks off, that we'll be really reinvigorated and ready to go again.
And look, since we made this decision, the spark to play Commander for Commander's sake is reignited. Yesterday, Friday, I went to my LGS, played CEDH with my CEDH group, and then went to Palms Off Gaming's headquarters and played a ridiculously long 3.5 hour game. It was great fun. We had a great time. We ordered pizzas, had a couple of beers. It was great. So I'm playing Commander for Commander's sake now, and I feel like I've not got an obligation to be taking notes for the Space Commanders for the next episode and stuff like that. Which, look, don't get us wrong. Walt and I love making this content, and we just want to make sure that Get Commanded has a long way to go into the future. So we're just making sure we can take a break and be able to do that without feeling like we're going to lose listeners or lose subscribers. So we'll be back.
Definitely.
Don't worry.
And in the meantime, just listen back to some old episodes.
Yeah.
Share it around. If you've got anyone who hasn't listened to any episodes yet, pick your favorite and send it to them. That would be really appreciated, because just to keep our numbers nice and high, we like that.
It really, really does help. Genuinely, if you're the only one in your play group that is listening to Get Commanded, share it to your play group. Next time you're playing a game of Commander, just be like, hey, they just released an episode on Ramp, and you've been on 3 lands and no other mana for the rest of this game. Maybe you should listen to that episode. Or, someone talks about how red makes them feel so passionate. Be like, hey, Get Commanded did a whole color philosophy series.
That's true.
It really, really does help. That's the stuff that helps us grow more than, posting on Twitter or posting on Instagram.
Yeah.
That's
Tell
the
people.
stuff that helps us.
Definitely. But yeah, we'll be back for a stream on Monday, the 7th of October, and the podcast will return on the 11th of October. So yeah, exactly 2 Fridays that there'll be no episode, and then that next Friday we'll be back for more. And speaking of, we have an incoming transmission from the deep depths of the galaxy, from the Space Commanders. It's time to get commanded.
Tracking your Commander games yields essential data regarding the performance of your decks and the format at large, but there are many potential methods for tracking. Players should consider which factors are most important to track and whether these need be tracked at all.
Okay, we've probably been skirting around this topic for a while.
Yeah, I mean, the game log comes up pretty frequently. It's a thing that I'm still keeping. You kept for quite a while.
I went for about 2 months with mine.
Yep.
And I'm assuming we'll talk about why I stopped. We'll talk about that.
That seems right. But yeah, we're talking about ways of tracking your Commander games. A game log is a really obvious way of doing this.
I think it's getting more popular. We've spoken about, the game logs that we kept on this podcast for a while. But since then, I have played multiple Commander games where I've seen people whip out their phone after the game to take some notes.
Yeah, well, we've also, spoiler a little bit, but there's a new system that a few people who listen to this podcast have pointed us to in the Discord server, which they use to track their playgroups games. So we'll talk about that definitely. But
shout out our Discord server for really being on the front foot of what the Space Commanders are looking for. Yeah. Good work, guys.
Clearly, you guys received this transmission before we did. So the question I think we should answer immediately is, why should I track my games? Well, as the Space Commander said, you get really excellent data. Right at the gate, I think it's a really great way to spot issues in your decks.
Yeah.
If your decks are consistently missing land drops, there's not enough ramp, not enough card draw, any sort of consistent issue that crops up for a deck, pretty much every time you pull it out, you're going to want to try and address those issues.
Yeah, there's a big thing here about confirmation bias, right? I think that's a big factor that goes into actually tracking it, getting raw data instead of just basing your feelings about a deck off feelings.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, I feel like I always miss my land drops, where then you can look back in your game log and be like, actually, the last 10 times I've played this deck, I've won with it 8 times.
Yeah.
It's just those last 2 games in the past couple of days that this deck really has flopped.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't need to edit it as much as I thought I did.
Yeah, or the inverse as well, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes
true.
we only remember the wins that we get with a deck, and so we can have 5 games in a row where we get really mana screwed, and then the next game we get really flooded.
And then we're this deck is perfect. I knew it.
Yeah,
it was working all along.
If anything, I should cut some lands.
Yeah.
It's no, don't do that.
I can go down to 20. It's fine.
Another really important thing that you'll keep track of is how much you're winning and losing.
This is a big one. I think that winning and losing is something we've talked about this in Commander Cognitive Distortions.
Yes.
We talked about this pretty much every time I bring up my losing streak.
Yes.
I've broken that now, by the way. I won the game at Palms Off Gaming.
Nice.
Won a couple of games in the store yesterday as well. So I'm
Excellent.
definitely out of my little slump.
Good.
But it really does like give you a good track. And we have always said that like if you're in a perfect world, you should be winning 25% of your Commander games.
Yeah, somewhere in that realm will be nice and healthy. 30%'s fine, 20%'s fine. But yeah, if you're winning 60% of the time, your playgroup might have some resentment towards you, justifiably.
Yeah, but also if you're winning 60% of the time, that might be an indicator that, hey, maybe my decks are too powerful.
Yeah.
Or it just like, and this is a big thing. I've talked to a few people in our Discord about their win percentages being over 25, and they feel this like intense sense of guilt where they feel like, oh, my decks are way too powerful and all this kind of stuff. But sometimes it's just because you're a really good player, and that's also totally fine.
Yeah, it's good to shoot for that 25%, but yeah, having a number will let you evaluate that more reasonably and not like, oh, I feel like I always win. It's like, well, how much do you actually win? Yeah, this can answer that for you.
It's like takes that confirmation bias thing away, right? It like actually gives you the real data by tracking the games.
Absolutely. I think the other thing that you can find, and this is sort of almost the inverse of that winning too much thing, you can find out if there are particular decks or cards you're struggling against. This can be a really good, this can give you a bunch of different ways to go from here from, oh, maybe I need to include more graveyard hate in my deck, or maybe I need to include more hexproof for my commander or something, to, the opposite of going, every time this, my friend Ben pulls out this deck, I lose every single time. And it's like, either I need to adjust my decks to deal with that, or maybe I need to tell Ben, hey, Ben, that deck always wins, right?
Well, I mean, that's kind of the thing that you had with me about my Savine deck for a really long time, right? Like, I've depowered my Savine deck because you just got to a point where you were like, hey, look, dude, every time I've played against this, I've lost to it. Not just like other people at the table, but like this deck has won the last 10 times I've played against it. Do you think it might be too powerful? And I looked at it and I've rebuilt it. Like I've made it a lot more, manageable to deal with. I think that there's a real big thing about like managing your playgroup here. Like there's a real big thing of like adjusting playgroups' expectations around the decks they're playing and around like how powerful that deck is, but also just how good a particular player in your playgroup can be.
It arms you with the data, right? Like it allows you to have these conversations that you probably should be having regardless of whether you have data or not, but it gives you like a real basis to found it on. Like if you say to someone, hey, I feel like you're always beating me, they can pretty easily be like, oh, I'm not sure that's the case. But if you have the data and you go like, actually the last 10 times I've played against you, you won 8 times, that's a different conversation. And so it's good to just have that data to support your argument.
It also, I think, avoids the, like, those conversations that are inherently like, hey, dude, I think that deck's too powerful. No, it's not. This deck's fine. It's not got any infinite combos in it. I can play it. It's like, well, actually, having the data to back up those conversations just makes them a little, I'm going to say softer is the word I want to use. It makes it feel like it's less personal because you're just being like, hey, look, based on the data, like, this isn't my feelings saying this. True. This is the data saying this.
Yeah, it's kind of a less, like accusatory way.
Yeah, that's what I'm going for.
Of like coming to someone with a problem. Yeah, 100%. Definitely. We're going to talk about 4 different systems that you could use for tracking your games, most of which we ourselves have tried at various times or have been around when they've been used. And then we'll conclude with a discussion, I think, about tracking in general, because the Space Commands did say you need to consider which factors are most important and whether these need be tracked at all. So I think it's worth having a genuine discussion at the end of this episode of going like, is it worth tracking your games in any way? Because it's a reasonable question, and I think one that will be more armed to answer after we've talked about 4 different systems that you could use.
Yeah. Now, can we start with yours?
We can start with mine.
Yours is what I based mine off.
Yes.
So I started with because you started tracking yours well before I did, and I was like, okay, I want a system. I wanted to add some things to mine, but everything that was in your system was like really valuable for not only making content, but also just like knowledge of your decks.
Yeah, I have a pretty, I'm going to call it a pretty extensive system.
It's a long list of things.
It's a long list of things. And so I think, anyway, we'll talk about it after, but this is a lot of stuff. So keep that in mind as I'm describing this. The things that I track in my spreadsheet are how my deck performed. This is just a free-form text box. Deck was good. Deck missed land drops. Whatever. Every commander I played, what I played, and every other commander in the pod. So I was on. I just went to say Zaxara. That's your deck.
You could have been on Zaxara. If you want to play it, you're more than welcome to.
I was on Gandalf. James was on Zaxara. These are the other two commanders. Whatever. Who won? Obviously,
important one.
And whether I lost or won. How the game ended.
This is one that I really like. You outline the win conditions.
Yeah.
So it's either go wide, overrun, or, combo off with these cards, or something like, a mill, or you just highlight the win condition and then usually the card that won the game alongside it.
And also how many cards was something I was tracking for a while. I'm interested to look at this data again at some point. But specifically, if someone just had all of their board and then just cast Overrun, I would call that a 1-card win. But if there was sort of 2 or 3 spells cast on that final turn that put you over the line, then I count all of those as well.
For example, if you had 10 1/1s, but then you cast a creature where their power and toughness is equal to number of creatures you control, and then cast Overrun, that would be, and cast Overwhelming Stampede, which is then every other one of those 1/1s that can swing this turn get +10/+10. That would be a 2-card win condition.
Yeah, exactly. And look, a lot of the time it ends up being 3 or 4 as well. I also tracked whether one of the cards that was involved in the win was the commander. I just thought that was an interesting bit of data to track. Probably the most time-consuming one to track, but maybe one of the most interesting, and resulted in the episode Cards at the Crux, if you remember that.
Really enjoyed that episode.
Yeah, turning point cards. So these are cards that sort of shifted the game from one spot into another. Usually these were board wipes. Sometimes it was just a spell that was so strong it was game warping.
Sometimes it was a win attempt.
Yeah, someone literally went for the win that turn.
Or a big protection spell.
Yeah, a big removal spell cast at the right time. Someone went for the win. Someone else had the swords or had the free interaction at that time. That's
if you haven't checked out Cards at the Crux, definitely go check it out, because that was a really interesting episode to see. It really outlines the narrative of a commander game.
Yeah.
Chapter 1 was about this card.
Yeah.
Chapter 2 was about this card.
Yeah.
And the final act was about this card.
It's really shifted how I think about commander, which is, I think, the sign that it was a good structure to look at. I also tracked the game length in minutes. For a while, I was tracking also if I used a clock, how many minutes I had on that clock. I haven't really used the commander clock in a really long time now. I think it was very useful when we were playing a lot in a game store just to keep people accountable. But I've sort of shifted away from it now. But I still track the length of the game in minutes because I just think it's interesting.
That's probably the thing we care about more as casual players as well. We don't really care about the turn number. We care more about how long we were sat in the chair for.
And to be fair, I would say, if I can add now, that the things I think I'm notably absent in my log, because again, there's a lot there, so there's not a lot of stuff missed, but the really notable stuff that is missed is the number of turns, I think would be one that would be good to know. And also seat position. Who went first, whether the person in first won, stuff like that, I think would be really interesting to know and is not something that I'm tracking at the moment.
Something that ended up in my system, which we'll talk about after this.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, look, I really want to know if you would recommend your system and if you would be willing to share the template of your document on our Discord for people to track this.
I have the template. I'm definitely happy to share this with people if people would like it. Do I recommend it? I think tracking in general, and maybe this can apply to the other categories when we go into them, it makes sure you do Rule Infinity. That's an even older episode, by the way.
For those that aren't initiated, we refer to Rule Infinity as the post-game conversation, which Magic Twitter actually just recently has been talking quite a lot about. Which is this conversation you have after the game to kind of say, hey, do we think the game was balanced? Do we think we nailed the power level of this game? Do we like how everyone played? Was there particular cards that we didn't like? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I think if you can find any of the game nights table talk, I think it's called.
That's basically a professional Rule Infinity.
Yeah. They don't talk a lot about power level, which I think is really good to talk about in Rule Infinity. But they do talk a lot about what was important in that game and what plays mattered, and that stuff's really cool to see.
It's usually the one that kind of revolves around the piece of data that revolves around this conversation is usually the cards that were relevant, the cards at the crux.
Yes, yeah.
It's usually the question that you ask immediately after the game finishes is, hey guys, what were the turning point cards in that game?
Yeah, what cards mattered, what shifted the tides, and then you have a really interesting conversation about people's ability to answer, what problems felt too big to solve. Like it brings so much out just by asking that question, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, someone will say, "Oh, James's Academy manufacturer was insane."
Yeah,
and I was like, "Yeah, I did, get a lot of value from that." And then my Inspiring Statuary meant that I could, tap them all for mana with improvise and stuff like this. It's a good way of just starting the conversation. If you find it hard to start those conversations, this is a real big benefit of this.
Definitely.
tracking.
You've got the log to point to.
Yeah.
Someone can go, if someone was like, "Oh, why are you doing that?" I could be like, "Well, it's right here in the log."
Yeah.
I think tracking my deck's performance has been a really great way to tinker mindfully.
That's a good little word to put on the end there.
Yeah. I have talked before on this podcast about how I tinker too much. Like
Obsessively
literally,
is the word I would use.
Sure. Well, literally, yeah. I'm removing cards, but before I've really given them a genuine look at whether they're good or not. And tracking my own deck's performance has meant that I can kind of go back and go like, oh, how many times have I been presented with this problem and then solved it? And therefore, do I even need to tinker to fix this problem that I think I'm having that I'm probably just not having?
Yeah.
I think if I'm talking about whether I'm recommending this, I recommend tracking in general. I recommend tracking a lot less than this. It's a lot of work, and I think it only really yields great results because we make content about it.
Yeah, look, I think we're in a really lucky position where we get to use this data at the end of the day to like produce something, whereas for most players it will be just sat in your phone in a notes app or in an Excel spreadsheet. And that's all it'll just be a thing that you can reference, which there's lots of benefits to that, which we've spoken about, tracking the losses, validating your opinions, all that kind of stuff. But it is a lot of work. And I think this is one of the things that I wanted to really highlight is that I tracked using your system and an additional system, which we'll go into in a minute for CEDH.
Yeah.
But I did it for about 2 months at the start of this year. I did
You
it
got to 50 games
50
and then
games.
stopped after 50.
Yes. And I reckon around half of those or maybe a little bit more were CEDH games. So there was like an additional set of things that I added to your template.
Which we'll definitely go into.
Which we'll talk about. But that was additional. And like your template was already a lot.
Yeah.
And tracking the additional stuff that we'll talk about in the CEDH template was even more intense. It was like quite a lot of stuff. And I found like after 50 games, and that was just like nearly 2 months of playing, I was burnt out. From it. Like if I feel like Commander is like a chore, tracking the game makes it more of a chore.
Yeah, it's just a workload that it adds to every game, and it's a load on your brain. And look, a lot of the time you just want to get into the next game. Yeah, especially if you're playing CDH or playing in a pod where the games can be short. 80-minute, 70-minute games. You often just want to get into that next one as soon as possible because Steve's got to get home to his kids, or Jack's got work in the morning. Like these things happen, and we often want to just like get to the next one, which is totally valid as well.
I reckon it's like sometimes it takes around nearly 10 minutes to fill out this game log, especially if you have a discussion, which is good. You should have that discussion, but like having the discussion and trying to track it, it's like maybe 10-15 minutes in between games is like a whole game over the course of a game night that you lose.
Yeah, definitely. I think, again, I have the template for my game log. I'll send it through when we post this episode next Friday. Well, for you right now. It's live. But so if you can try this yourself. I would say there are definitely columns here that you could just straight up eliminate. Stuff like how many cards were involved in the win. I don't think that's going to yield very valuable data to you. And I think, even stuff like game length, you could maybe go without, which commanders. Like, I think really the essential stuff is like who's winning, which decks are winning. Actually, maybe the commanders do matter. Who's winning, which decks are winning, and the turning point, and your deck's performance. Sorry. Your deck's performance, I think, is the most interesting one to track in accordance with wins and losses. That'll give you a really like objective way of looking at your decks when it comes to tinkering and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Jump in our Discord. Grab that template.
Definitely.
All right. I want to talk about the additional stuff that I did for the template that I use specifically for CEDH games.
So this is a system that is much more tailored to the kinds of things that matter in CEDH.
Yeah, the things that you want to be aware of about the metagame, about your deck's performance, about particular archetypes, whether it be turbo, combo, control, stacks, that kind of thing.
Which stuff did you add to your log when you were tracking CEDH?
So there was a few things that were missing from your list that you've already noted.
Mm-hmm.
The first one being seat position.
Matters even more in CDH than it does in casual by a wide margin.
You are in a huge disadvantage if you are in seat 4.
Yeah.
Like, I cannot express to you. The only advantage that you get from being in seat 4 in CDH is that you get to see everyone's mulligan choice before you make your own. That is the only benefit.
Yeah.
Everything else is a disadvantage.
Yeah.
Your Mystic Remora is now shit because you are in seat 4.
Yeah, you might have to mull your hand with a Mystic Remora in it with the knowledge that it probably won't get you any cards.
100%. So seat position is a really important one. I also just track everyone's seat position. That's a really big thing. So like I track if the Turbo Ad Nauseam deck was in the first seat.
Yeah.
Because that is like immediately the best seat that deck can be in.
Yeah.
And a very hard a thing for the rest of the table to deal with. So
Yeah.
if they win, there's a kind of reason for that. There's
Yeah.
something to point to for that.
I mean, like, as just a parallel, in my game log, I've started to track when the player who got the first Soul Ring wins. Because I think it matters in casual to a similar extent to how it matters in CDH.
Oh, that's an interesting one.
yeah.
Surely there's going to be some Get Commanded content.
Yeah,
around that.
there's got to be. But yeah, like, it order of things really matters.
Yeah.
And who has access to what resources and when, and especially in CDH, where every incremental margin can be game winning at the time.
Yeah, speaking of resources, the other thing that I added was mulligans.
Yep.
So this is all players mulligans. So again, this is a good representation of like if you won a game, but you kept a 7-card hand and everyone else had to mull to 4, this is probably a good reason why you won that game. Like,
and then equally the inverse, right? If everyone kept 6 land hands and you mull to 4 and won, then that's a really good like endorsement in your head of going, I was right to mull there.
Yeah,
probably.
my deck can get there even if I mulligan.
Yeah.
I will point out in my template, I didn't actually track the number of turns. I tracked the time like you did.
Sure.
Mainly because I was getting into tournament CEDH and round timers were a big important thing there.
Probably matter more than the number of turns in that case. Yeah.
The other thing that I tracked were win attempts for my own deck.
Makes
like
sense.
how many times I tried to present a win.
Yep.
The other thing that I really tracked, instead of like just the commanders, I also tracked the archetype of the deck.
Sure. So
like
you're highlighting the commanders and then going, because like we know if we look at the CDH database that there's not just one Kenrith deck.
No.
There's Kenrith Control, Kenrith Midrange. Like,
Kenrith Reanimator.
Yeah.
There's like all of these different ways Kenrith can be built. So like same with Urza. There's Urza Polymorph.
Yeah.
There's Urza Stacks.
Yeah.
So I try and put like a bit of a brackets next to the commander just to be like,
Makes sense.
This is the archetype that I'm trying to get.
Yep.
And then also just like a free-form box of notes on my own lines. So this is something that I really started to track when I started to play specifically Mad Farm, which is a kind of Turbo Norse deck that has a very strong pivot into a mid-range Timna creature-based strategy.
It's a Mardu turbo deck, so you have less of the interaction but a lot more of the turbo stuff.
Yeah, one of the key win conditions here is like infinite mana with LED and LED and Underworld Breach. So you're generating infinite mana by recasting LED.
Yep. And then Jeska's your win con.
Jeska in the command zone can just be an infinite mana outlet and kill your opponents.
Yeah.
So notes on your own lines just helps you learn the deck more is a big thing. So, you know, saying that like, oh, I messed up and cast Final Fortune when I didn't have the win next turn because I was missing this card in hand or something like that.
Or when I cast my Demonic Tutor and I searched for some fast mana there, I actually should have probably grabbed an interaction piece.
Because
it was more important that then when I went for the win con, I had my Pyroblast in hand. That might have mattered more.
This is just a freeform thing. It's just kind of like a note to self, especially like if you're learning a deck that has a primer, like a deck that you've been trying to practice.
Yeah.
It's just a thing that you can go back to be like, oh, why did I screw up this thing? Let me go back to the primer. Let me read that section and get a little bit of better understanding.
Yeah, definitely. Do we recommend this system? I think if you're a CDH grinder, like if
100%.
if your performance in CDH matters to you a lot, then this will be really valuable to you, right?
Take out all the casual stuff that we just mentioned, though, because like basically everything that I just mentioned is the really important stuff for the CDH.
You don't really care about how many cards were involved in the win.
No.
I mean, the time probably does still matter to you, but turning point cards matters less, probably.
There's probably also like an argument about like it doesn't really matter about the these cards at the crux, the turning point cards.
Not so much. It's more like, what could you have done differently?
Yeah.
Your lines thing that you were tracking.
The notes on the
matters
lines.
more. Like, what was my way out of that situation rather than, oh my God, I just realized Toxic Deluge is so good. And it's like, you and everybody else.
We knew that, Chief.
Yeah.
I think that the good thing is, like, if you're a CDH grinder, this is great. But if you're learning CDH, or if you're even preparing for a tournament, if you're in this kind of realm of like trying to be better, this is a great thing. I've stopped tracking my CDH games just because there's no tournaments coming up that I'm preparing for.
Sure.
But I probably will start for the next kind of year of tournaments, just CDH probably, not casual. But yeah, if you are preparing for a tournament, it's great. The other thing that I really want to highlight here is CDH is such a widely spoken about metagame in around the world. There is a, EDH top 16, RIP maybe, but like there's lots of people that track the metagame of CDH. However, that might not be the metagame you are playing in. If you track specifically the decks and the deck archetypes that you're playing against, you will get a much better reflection of your metagame than going on to, the CDH database and just looking at those decks, because you might not be going up against any mid-range decks. Everyone in your play group might be like, I'm just slamming turbo, baby. Let's go. Grixis all day. So this is actually going to give you a much better representation of what you should be expecting, and can make you make edits to your decks specifically. And this is fine, because remember, CDH, you can make edits to hose your metagame. You can make plays.
That's the nature of the beast, right?
You can play. You might go, I might play this Vexing Bauble because I know that everyone's on free interaction. Like, it's a big thing. And I think that, especially if you're playing in tournament scenes in your local area, like Melbourne has a pretty solid metagame, and there's things about it that I can tell you just from looking at my data from earlier this year.
I think there's two sides to this, right? There's adapting your deck to the meta that you're in, but then also, if you are someone who's going to be competing in international tournaments or tournaments that are very firmly outside of the metagame that you are practicing in, this can also let you contextualize cards that always look bad in your metagame. You can look at the metagame at large and then acknowledge that your meta is really mid-range or your meta is really control, and go, actually, this card I know will be really good when I'm approaching these other metagames, because I understand that my metagame is a control metagame, or my metagame is a stacks metagame. And so, it can allow you to contextualize, like, I know that this card looks bad every time it comes up in this meta, but when I go to this other tournament, it's going to be a lot better because I know I'm going to be facing, Blue Farm. I know I'm going to be facing Turbo Adnors. Like,
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing, just getting like a view of the metagame you exist in. And really being able to understand it, because you're the only one. You're the one that's in it. It's so
context.
It's such a weird thing of like going through the database or going through EDH top 16 or looking at tournament results and stuff like that, and scrolling down being like, this doesn't look anything like what I'm versing. And then you're trying to build a deck from that list of decks. It doesn't make sense. So your metagame is important to you specifically in CDH.
Yeah, definitely. We've talked for a little while now already. I reckon it might be time for a thrifty interlude.
Yeah, this is literally the point, like, in between games where you say, hey guys, what were the turning points? What's the thrifty turning point card in this game?
What's the cheapest card that mattered?
Actually, looking at the card we've got lined up, this card can come up as a turning point card.
This has come up multiple times for me. I still can't believe this card is so cheap. It was so expensive for such a long time. It got reprinted. It hasn't skyrocketed yet. Pick one up while you can. We've got lots to talk about, of course. We're going to talk about 2 more ways you can track your games and whether you should track it all. Before that, we're getting a little something about a thrifty card. And as is tradition, I will be performing. This week, it's the Cowled Merchant with some new wares. James, you want to read the card we're featuring this week?
I sure would, because it's a gotcha card, and I love gotcha cards. It's good. Comeuppance. For 3 and a white, you get an instant that reads, prevent all damage that would be dealt to you and planeswalkers you control this turn by sources you don't control. If damage from a creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to that creature. If damage from a non-creature source is prevented this way, Comeuppance deals that much damage to the source's controller.
Ever think the world is just not fair? Wish your enemies got what was coming to them? Well, I know one solution that always makes you feel better. Revenge Revenge! Did someone insult you? Tell them to get stuffed! Slapped on the face? Slap them back! Got your pay cut? Chop off the head. Room in the budget. That means sack somebody, I think, and definitely not whatever you thought I might have meant. Never assume you know the end of one of my sentences, or the start, or the middle of nowhere with nothing but a sack of matches and a box of potatoes. You see? You know nothing about my criminal past. Some people give it, and they just can't take it. Like vending machines. I can never shove a Pepsi back in and get a refund. What's that? Gravity, you said. No, it's definitely not that. I'm allergic. Get budgeted.
I think that's the most meta the cow merchant's been in a while. Pretty poignantly saying, don't assume that you know how this will end.
Yeah.
Which is also how I feel about holding a comeuppance in my hand when someome's about to do something.
It's wild. Like, it always does something slightly different to what I expect. Like, I have to read it multiple times. I tried to use it, like, on a board wipe, and then someone was like, that doesn't do anything.
It's only damage to you.
It has to be damage to you or planeswalkers you control, but not to your creatures.
The best play you've ever pulled off with this card was... We were at a kitchen table game.
Yeah.
One of our patrons, Dylan Norg, played a Last March of the Ents, I think it was, which just drops a bunch of creatures onto the battlefield.
In his Dragon deck, specifically. Yeah.
So, like, I think it was round 6 or 7 dragons were about to just hit the table.
And there was a Dragon Tempest on the battlefield.
That was the scary thing.
Yes.
Because Dragon Tempest reads whenever a dragon enters the battlefield, it deals that much damage to any target.
Equal to the number of dragons you control, I think.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, not to its power. That's the...
But the dragon, importantly, the dragon itself deals the damage.
So Comeuppance makes all of that damage be dealt straight back to the dragon.
Yeah.
And it was like a... Last March of the Ents is usually a win condition for a lot of decks.
I was dead on the stack.
Yeah.
And instead, Dylan's board got wiped.
Yeah, it was a one-sided board wipe in the last kind of throes of a game. It was really impressive.
Look, I don't think this card is like busted powerful, but I think it's good enough that it is a steal at its current price, which I think is still in the realm of $2. So
I also think it's slottable in so many decks because it's only one white pip and like 4 mana. It's pretty slottable in that protection category.
Yeah. And it will keep you alive. And there'll be loads of times where it straight up either kills the player who attacked you because non-combat sources are dealt back to the player, sorry.
Yeah, so if someone does a big burn spell like a Devil's Play equals 15 in your face, you can cast this and they take 15. It's intense.
And then the creature board wipe is obviously a big plus as well. Yeah. Thrifty Thursdays happens every week in our Discord server. You can check out the dedicated channel, play some games, or get some advice on your latest deck.
Yeah, and just hang out with some really cool people.
Yeah, like some of the people who recommended this system to us.
What a segue. Oh my God, he's a king.
Playgroup.gg.
Yeah, this came from our Discord. We genuinely had no idea about this.
It was one of our patrons, Benjamin, showed this to us, and then in a recent episode, they were talking about some stats, and then like 2 or 3 other people in the Discord were like, yeah, I also use this. Here's my stats. So basically, it's a playgroup system. Disclaimer right at the bat, me and James have never personally used this ourselves. So
I've made an account now.
Okay.
Interestingly.
So there you go.
So
it's
like
possible.
Halfway there. I just need to now put the data in.
Yes. So this is a really interesting system. It has an inbuilt life tracker. So in order to get the data that you are mining from your games, you have to use this as your life tracker for your pod. So you put this in the center of the table, you set some stuff like what commander everyone's playing, what player everyone is. So there's a bit of configuring required.
And I think it also can track mulligans, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, okay.
I think it can do that.
Sure.
I'm not sure, but yeah.
I hope so. That would be really interesting.
It does a lot of stuff in the pre-game where it's like, you tell it who's playing first, like who's in the first seat, all this kind of stuff.
I just want to know who's on first.
Yeah. I'm not asking you who's on second. I'm asking you who's on first.
And what's a mulligan? So anyway,
who's mulligan?
Yes. I don't know.
There's a whole short skit around
there
that. There's definitely a TikTok coming out with that now that we've said that.
So the life tracker will generate a whole bunch of data when you use it for games, and especially consecutive games, like how each player performs. It gives every player in your play group an ELO. This is a system for a ranking point that indicates your skill level. So
Yeah.
in chess, for reference, the elo is a thing that they use.
Yeah, if you've ever played on chess.com, that's how you get paired up against different people.
Most competitive games have an elo that they don't show you. Like
Yeah.
even like if when I
Most
played
video
Rocket League,
games have them, yeah.
When I played Rocket League, there was a mod you could download that would show you what your actual. It was called MMR matchmaking rating, but it was effectively elo.
I have a very strong memory of you specifically trying to tank your elo so you could play in games with me.
No, it was like casual elo.
Yeah.
Because in Rocket League, there's a competitive elo and a casual one. And yeah, I was trying to tank my casual.
So
So,
you can
we'd end
play
up in
with
lobbies
me.
where you wouldn't get murked. Yeah.
Because like if we partied up, the way that the system would calculate it would be on an average of our elos. So Walt's elo is like miles ahead of
Yeah.
mine. So the average opponent would be, way better than what my elo was. So I would therefore be the worst player on the field.
It was actually a lot crueler than that. It pulls it way closer to the higher ranked player.
Oh, so I would have been really murked.
Yeah. Like I was like a Grand Champion 3 at the time. No, not Grand Champion. Champion 3, or maybe Grand Champion 1,
Pretty
whatever
sure I was
rank that was.
rookie
Yeah,
3.
something like that. And so we would have been paired with like people pretty close to my rank, which is a lot higher than what yours was.
I couldn't even do fucking aerials at that point. Like, that wouldn't have been fair.
No. But yes, elo. So you get an elo for each player. Every deck gets its own elo as well. So if a deck wins a game,
Yeah.
then that deck's elo goes up.
This is something I really like about the metagame tracking that I was talking about before.
Yeah.
This, like, if you're using this for casual, you get a weird metagame of your casual
You do.
group now.
And start to, like, in the same way that my game log was telling me which decks were problems, like, this really closely tracks
Yeah.
it. Because also elo is calculated based on the elo of your opponents when you win. So if you have a high elo deck, and you play against 3 low elo decks, you won't get very many points when you win, and they won't lose many points when they lose, because the game goes, oh no, this was not a very fair game in the first place.
You were like set up to win.
Yeah,
from the start.
And so it kind of, it can calculate stuff. We'll go into some downsides to that in a sec. But yeah, it also tracks really closely, because you're using the life tracker, some of that stuff that we said was really cool, like how many turns the game lasted, how many minutes each turn took.
I love tracking this. On Spell Table, there's a little clock
Yes.
in the corner, and I would hazard a guess that my turns are always the quickest, because I usually
In the average pot, I would say so.
hold up responses. So
Yep.
I'm usually never the person that people go, oh, come on, make a move,
No,
make a game action. I'm
it's
like,
rare.
yeah, I'm always the type of person that kind of pokes people and go, come on, what you doing?
It's good
What
to have
you
some
doing?"
stats to support this too,
Yeah.
right? To be like, hey, the other guy, your turns
Make a
take
game
10
action.
minutes on average. It's turn 4, dude. It can't be that complicated.
Cast migration path and pass the turn.
Yes, exactly. You also get some really fun game stats, like who did the most damage in one turn.
Oh, that's a cool one.
Who did the most damage in total across the entire game, and
like that.
to who. Then you get loads of really interesting data from this. Do we recommend this? I'm going to say right at the gate, personally, I only recommend this if you have a consistent play group.
Yeah.
I think these things like the player elo, like the deck elo, are going to function a lot better when they're in a really controlled environment, i.e. there are not very many other variables affecting it. My elo would just fluctuate wildly all over the place if I was using this everywhere I play, because we play Patreon games, we play on stream, we play Kitchen Table, we play
play
at game
Palms Off
stores,
Gaming.
we play at conventions. Like,
Yeah.
there are so many random players that, like, my player elo would be meaningless, because I would very rarely, except for you, play with the same person more than once. And so
Interesting just to get an elo of each of us.
that would be
Like,
probably
just
something worth
between me and
knowing.
you.
Yeah, because I did that calculation before of who won more and stuff, and that's interesting.
Slightly ahead.
Slightly
Yeah,
ahead,
Slightly
yeah.
ahead. But look, I think that this probably won't work for me and you. However, I will say that I have a really interesting potential use, and it's my CEDH group.
That makes sense.
I think that I'm going to propose. I already have kind of sent because I've talked about these guys before. This is the Chad Nauseum group. Love these guys. They're my favorite group to play CEDH with. But we train together. Like, we prepare and we specifically make decks that are missing in our meta group to say, oh, we don't have a Sisay deck yet. Let's make a Sisay deck so we can see how we play against it.
And consequently, by the way, like, the number of tournaments in our local scene that have been won by a member of this play group is at this point pretty substantial.
Yeah, in the past, so I reckon in the past 5 tournaments, there has been a representative from our playgroup in the final pod at least, and we've won maybe
3 or 4 of them, I think. Like Ben's won multiple times, Johnny's won, Jordan's won.
I've top 4'd, I've top 8.
There's like, it's a really strong meta game that are here.
We're pretty good.
Yeah.
Is what we're saying. No, I think that if I can get that group to use this, we'll get some really interesting data. But like, I would pretty much use it exclusively for that playgroup and that playgroup only.
Yeah, I think that's the way to do it. I think that this player elo function seems very temperamental, where like if your pod is really inexperienced, your 2000 elo may theoretically match you up against a pro in the outside world, but in practice it's just a controlled environment that you're in that's resulting in your elo getting inflated.
Yeah, because you might only ever be playing with the same 3 people at your house at the kitchen table, and you might go, wow, I'm the best player in my playgroup. I'm going to go to the LGS and play with the big boys at the back tables that play powerful decks.
Yeah.
And you might rock up with your slightly modified precon.
Yeah.
And you might get pub stomped. And I think that that's a bad thing for a tracking system to give you this like kind of false confidence.
It's really like, it's interesting actually. I'm going to bring it back to Rocket League for a second. There were some people who made some really strong arguments that the Australian Rocket League scene, the ranks of the players in our region was not necessarily representative of how skillful each player was, because the pool of players was quite small relative to Europe and North America.
So you as a percentage of the player base just have more of the elo because there's less players to get it from.
Well, it was also that like usually the pros achieve these absolutely bonkers elos because they queue against higher and higher ranked other pros and end up at this massive, massive number that's just obscene. But in Australia, that couldn't really happen because there wasn't enough players at that level to get points off. Like when a player gets to that point in Australia, they just keep winning and they get 1 point when they win because they're beating all these lower ranked people.
Interesting.
And so anyway, so there's this argument that got made that actually the Australian Rocket League scene was a lot like the average strength of a lobby in the Grand Champion rank was a lot higher than a Grand Champion ranked game in America or in Europe, because you had to beat a lot better players to get to that rank in the first place.
Interesting.
Anyway, I feel as though there's going to be a similar problem here, where in these closed environments, you're not really going to get a genuine representation of how your ability to compete with other people is.
I think that same sentiment goes for the deck elos as
Absolutely,
well, right? Like it's a
does.
similar thing. I think, look, it sounds like we're harking on this a little bit, but I want to point out that the criticisms we have of it are only in this kind of lens, or we're viewing it through the lens of it in the context of the wider meta.
Yes.
However, if you are in your playgroup and you're really, I think this is the other thing, if you're interested in the data from your playgroup, that's where this can come into like real use, because it is like, it's called playgroup.gg. It's all about your playgroup, and if you're interested in the data from that, you will get it. But yeah, the main criticism and gripe we have is the fact that once you take this out of the context of that playgroup, the data gets skewed.
It's just, I think honestly, my biggest criticisms is just them using the word elo, because like elo is used in competitive settings,
which is why I probably just want to use it for CEDH.
Yeah,
really,
because it makes sense there. And you know, like for reference, like this is exactly the same system that Magic uses. When you queue on Arena, you queue into, I mean, different depending on what format you're playing, but in Arena, in Standard, in Ranked, best of one, you have a rank, right? You have, there's Mythic, there's Diamond, Platinum. These are all ranks, and you get queued against similar players. Like this is how you matchmake for competitive games.
I'm sure there's probably a website out there where you can put in your username for Magic and it will give you your elo.
I would be certain that there would be.
There's so many websites for competitive video games that do just that.
Yeah, but yeah, I think the thing is that having an elo in a really small controlled environment is not going to be a great representation elsewise. But I agree with you. If you have a consistent play group, I know that people like Benjamin loves that, I think. And there was someone else in our Discord who used this very actively. Yeah. They said, yes, there's problems with it, like the elo. They had problems with it, even just in their play group.
But I like how there's like a life tracking thing inbuilt in the app. There's all this like great stuff about like,
it just like generates new graphs and stuff.
Fun little records, like the damage stuff. That's like fun stuff.
I think it's fun.
And I genuinely think if you're in our Discord and you're curious about this, please tag. I think Benjamin is probably the best person to tag. Sorry, Benjamin, for outing you in our Discord, but like you're a bit of an expert on this one.
Benjamin loves that, and I'm blanking. There's someone
Forgetting the
else in the
username.
Discord who also uses it.
Oh,
Anyway.
is it Arcpage?
Arcphage?
Arcphage?
It could be Arcphage. Not sure. Anyway, if you're at the Discord, sound off.
Yes.
After this episode comes out, be like, yes, it's me. Hi, I'm the ELO guy. Yeah.
Tag yourself.
Yeah,
I'm the
exactly.
playgroup.gg
Yeah.
user.
I want to talk about one more point system from someone who actually plays in your Chad Nauseum play
Yeah.
group.
Oh, is this Brad's system?
Brad's points system.
Yeah.
This is the far and away the simplest system we're going to talk about today.
Yeah.
You have one score that you keep track of. When you win a game of Commander, you get 3 points.
Yep.
When you lose a game of Commander, you lose a point.
1 point.
And so your number should stay near 0, right? If you win a game, you get 3 points, and then you lose your next 3, you're back to 0 again.
Yes, that's the
whole system.
tracking. So you're only tracking wins and losses here.
Yes.
So you lose out on all of that other stuff that we were talking about before.
The polar opposite of the playgroup GG
Yeah.
system. You don't have any fun stats you're drawing upon. It's not like my system where you have interesting things
Tracking
like
cards
how
and-
long the game's going forward. No, you lose all of that. But in terms of tracking wins and losses, there's something really elegant about this because it's a really great way of tracking your win rate without getting bogged down in the permutations of randomness that happen when you play a game of Commander, right?
Yes.
Like, because of randomness, because of your shuffles and your draws and the players you play against and other various factors, you can lose 10 games in a row.
Yep.
You can win 4 games in a row, but when you get in that, you get really absorbed in it. Whereas this point system really, Brad has said to me before, sometimes I'm negative for, I might be on -2 or -3 for a little while, but then I get a win and I'm back at 0 again.
Yeah. I think that because for those that haven't figured it out yet, this is based on Walt and I's recommendation that you should, in a perfect world, win 25% of your game. So
Yeah.
that's why a loss is only worth losing 1 point, because you are more likely to lose a game in Commander than to win it. And that's why winning gets you 3 points,
Yeah.
because you beat 3 opponents,
Yeah.
right? It's a really elegant system in its simplicity. And I think the other thing that it does is this: if you are on +5, +9, you're almost expecting to lose.
Yeah.
You're almost like, I'm kind of expecting to lose some points here because
sort of deserve some.
It's about my time
Yeah.
to go down. And there's the inverse, right? Of you could be down a few points. And then when you get that win, you're like, okay, yeah, no, I'm not as bad as I thought I was,
No.
because you jump up that scale so
Yeah.
quickly. If you are on -3, you can feel pretty bad because you may have lost 4 games in a row to get
6
from
games in a row,
yeah,
maybe.
to get all the way down to -3, and you're like, oh man, I'm really bad. Win 1 game, bang, back at 0.
Yeah.
And that makes you just feel, okay, cool, I'm good.
There's something really elegant about this, and I think it's a really low stakes way of tracking your wins and losses, which I really appreciate. It's very easy to just stop doing at any point. There's no obligation really associated with it. And also, it really takes the pressure off, where it's you kind of it sort of inbuilt acknowledges the fluctuations that happen as you play Commander, where you do win a few games in a row, or you win 4 of your next 5 games, and then you might lose 10, and that's fine because it's just a number that's moving along a scale.
I will
it's
say
cool.
that this does have a bit of a downside. I mean, obviously, you're losing out on all that amazing data that we're talking about, but you are focusing on the big thing that we tie a lot of our self-worth to, which is wins and
Absolutely.
losses. So this is a thing that why I, got a little bit burnt out by tracking, not because of how much work it was. That was one of the reasons, but also you are looking very closely at your wins and losses.
Yeah.
And if you have a very strong tie of your self-worth to your wins and losses, especially after the Commander Cognitive Distortions episode we did, this is this method only focuses on that.
Yeah, it's to the detriment of everything else that you
Yeah.
could be focusing on, which, in the Commander Cognitive Distortions episode, we focused on other things to try and take the brunt of that away.
Like win attempts,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
I think we should talk about whether we recommend tracking games in general, because I feel like we're segueing into it anyway.
Sure.
Because is it healthy to track your winning and losing? Pretty much every one of these systems every single one of them is tracking this explicitly. Are you winning? Are you losing?
Even the very basic Brad method
Yeah.
is just wins and losses. So at a minimum, you're doing that.
Yeah, and both me and James games have definitely gotten very dejected when losing a lot and when tracking that we're losing a lot in the past. And yeah,
and then having to report on it on a public
Yes,
podcast
exactly.
also is pretty hard.
And so, yeah, like it places all this emphasis on wins and losses at the expense of having fun, right?
Yeah.
Which is the real point of the game that we play. Look, I find tracking my deck performance really valuable. I think regardless of how I go moving forwards with tracking my games, because I, for instance, I'm coming up on the number 200.
Congrats.
Thank you, of games tracked in my log.
That is 4 times as many as I tracked.
And anyway, and I'm really thinking to myself, do I want to continue with this past 200 games? I'm honestly not sure at this point. It is time consuming. It is a little bit annoying in its current form. But yeah, I think at the very least, like I'm thinking probably that I'll continue tracking, but I might strip away a lot of this stuff that I think I'm not learning anything from anymore. And I think the stuff that I find really important, definitely one of them is how is my deck itself actually performing? Because it gives you so much better an idea of like, okay, do I need to do anything with this deck? Like for instance, my
I think
Merrin
that's
deck.
your favorite bit about it is the tinkering aspect of it.
Yeah, it's got to be. Like my Merrin deck at the moment is one that I'm looking at either shifting into a different commander or maybe just disassembling entirely. And it's partly because I looked at my game log at the last like 5 times I'd played it, and there were 2 like really explosive and great games, and there were like 3 non-games. Straight up, did not find things to sacrifice, did not find enough lands, did not find any card draw, had a horrible time. And it took like the third of those games where I was like, what is the deal with this deck? And scrolling back through my game log and going, wow, this is just a thing that happens when I play this deck.
Pretty consistently.
Yeah, it took that for me to really go, okay, I probably don't need to have this deck anymore. you know?
Yeah. Look, I'm currently not tracking my games, right? And I'm not tracking them because I found it a huge mammoth task that I was having to do in between games.
Yeah.
And I also found it pretty disheartening in that, cognitive distortion realm. However, I will say I have seen a lot of value in tracking games, especially for the content we make, but also specifically for CEDH for me personally. It's like a real solid thing of like giving me a reassurance that I'm winning more than I think I am and getting a real understanding on the metagame, the key cards, all this kind of stuff. So I think I will start tracking again, but I think, stripping it back will be a big thing for me, and probably tracking maybe only my CEDH games. I think something that I've started doing recently, which I've spoken about already on previous episodes, but I've stopped trying to track wins and losses in casual as much because I knew that I was on a losing streak. It's hard to not notice that.
Yeah.
But I've started winning games again, but I'm not trying to count. I'm not counting. What I'm trying to do is remember what happened in those games.
Yeah.
Any games that I lost, games that I won. What did I do that was really cool? Did I try and win a game? Did I get screwed on lands? All this kind. I'm trying to remember the details rather than just the result.
Yeah.
And that's to me better as just, I'm not putting it down on paper or in a notes document or anything or in a spreadsheet, but I'm having this kind of thing of like, no. My plays in a vacuum were great.
Yeah.
So that's the thing I should be proud of.
It's shifting your thinking and it's shifting your focus, right? It's like, these are the things that are important to me about the games that I play. And so these are the things I'll think about. And yeah, that's probably worth noting in general. Like, you can be monitoring your progress in various ways without having to write them down. And for some of us who are a bit obsessive, and I fall into this camp, it's the writing them down and looking at them and obsessing over them that is the thing that makes you spiral a bit on certain things.
It almost gives you an excuse to, doesn't it? It's like it's there in front of you, so you may as well analyze the hell out of it.
You should look at and think about. Yeah, and I think for a lot of us, we'll benefit from instead just having a retrospective lens of thinking about the game, but like emphasizing the positive, like we talked about in the Commander Cognitive Distortions episode.
I'm going to throw one more method of tracking your games out there that's not scripted. Just talk to your friends about it. Your playgroup.
Yeah, have the rule infinity.
Yeah, just genuinely talk about it post-game.
Yeah.
And like if you're feeling, if you're having one of those distortions that we've spoken about in the past of, I feel like I'm on a losing streak, talk to your playgroup about it. They'll probably give you the reassurance that you are a great Commander player because, let's be real, you are.
Yeah, definitely. Look, there are many different aspects of a Commander game that you can track and many different methods that focus on one or more of these aspects. With the right method, you can find out really valuable things about your decks or your playgroup, but for some, this might result in some unhelpful thinking patterns. That said, if you haven't tracked any Commander before, you should try at least one of our methods suggested today and just see how you go. You can always just stop if it doesn't suit you. So, Space Commanders,
Command received. It feels like a weird episode to have, this feels like a kind of relevant episode to take a hiatus after.
Yeah.
We've been making a lot of content.
Yes, we've been tracking a lot of things.
Tracking a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
We're getting a bit tired from
Yeah.
it. It's kind of maybe time for us to stop and then come back with a bit of a refreshed perspective.
Yeah, definitely. So to you listeners out there, do you feel commanded? Which tracking methods have you tried, and which ones will you now try for the first time?
I'm also curious if there's any systems that you have personally that you want to tell us about.
Yeah, that we didn't cover today. Definitely.
You can tell us on all of the social media platforms at Get Commanded, or you can jump in our Twitch chat every Monday night with the hiatus incoming, keep in mind. But the VODs will be there, twitch.tv/getcommanded. And you can always jump on our YouTube channel to watch the gameplay there and check out our latest monthly Meteor episode, which we spoke about Duskmorn previews.
Yeah.
We spoke about that CDH rules committee thing. And silver bordered cards, which is really fun. So go check that video out. There is now a playlist on our YouTube channel of monthly Meteor videos.
Great.
So you can check out all of our video podcast content. If you've never seen our faces before, go check it out on YouTube.
You can see our faces moving too, unlike the thumbnails. Don't forget as well to check out our Patreon page. It's linked in the show notes. It's the absolute best way to support the Get Commanded podcast directly. We would not be able to financially take a break, probably, if it wasn't for the fact that we knew we could rely on our patrons to support us. So we'd like to thank our patrons, Fuzzy, Bottomless Potamus, Dyer, Dylan Norg, Bertie, Crazy Logic, Benjamin, and Henry Solis. And we'd also like to make a very special shout out to Fletcher Cutting and Wizard Down Under, who support us in the Space Commander tier. You're the best.
Wow, 108 episodes and all these patrons.
I know.
It's been
Appreciate all of you.
Awesome ride.
Yeah.
Speaking of awesome ride, thanks to Palms Off Gaming specifically for hosting me last night at their head office to play some games, but also for sponsoring our podcast since the very beginning. They create fantastic deck boxes, sleeves, and binders, and all the other gaming accessories that you love, including some cool swag as well, like merchandise. Palms Off apparel is really good stuff.
You just got picked up one of the what sort of wind cheater.
Yeah.
What's the word for that?
It's like a windbreaker.
Yeah.
Really
like
cool.
Thin sort of top coat. Top coat. It's not a top coat.
No, it's a little bit tighter than that. It's like kind of like the wind cheater you would get. It's really stylish. It's got like this.
It's that sort of sporting style, like the kind of thing you'd see someone rock up to a basketball game with before they start warming up.
Yeah.
And then they take it off and then they've got the singlet underneath. Like that style of jacket, but it's much more stylish and
it's really
gold
cool.
accents.
It's got a local tattoo artist from Eltham, actually, around our like kind of area. Did the Oni design on the back.
Oh, that's cool.
Really sick. You should definitely check it. I can't remember the artist's name off the top of my head, but it'll be on Palms Off Gaming website, which you can go to at palmsoffgaming.com.au/#getcommanded. Now that's a segue to get 10% off your purchase and support the show at the same time. So check out all the stuff, palmsoffgaming.com.au /#getcommanded.
Definitely. You got to do it. Well, that's all the magic stuff for a few weeks. We better planeswalk out of here.
Yeah.
It's my turn. We're going outside of Commander. It's funny. I'm only realizing just now how much this is similar to what we've just been talking about.
Sure.
I've been really in on fitness YouTube. And I say that it's relevant because there's a lot of tracking and stats and numbers involved in going to the gym.
And like tracking your meals and all this kind of stuff. You are just a stats lover.
It's true.
But I've said this as a joke multiple times. Walt weighs his muesli in the morning.
It's the only thing I weigh.
I still find it amazing. It's such a representation of who you are. As like, I want to make sure that I know what I'm having for my breakfast.
Yeah, I eat very similar things every day as well. I'm very like, must eat my fruit, must eat my nuts, must eat my vegetables.
Yeah.
Yes. Anyway, I wanted to recommend a couple of YouTube channels that I found really helpful because they're really science-based. There's a lot of conjecture in fitness communities of like, yeah, but Ronnie Coleman, the 4-time Mr. Olympia, lifted like this, so I guess I should do that as well. And it's like, or we could look at the science, maybe.
I always appreciate actual, sports physiologists giving me actual breakdowns of what's happening physiologically in the body.
I've been really enjoying Jeff Nippard. I've watched for a really long time now.
You showed me Jeff Nippard years
I've
ago.
Definitely recommended him to you before. Really, really outstanding, like very short, very well edited videos looking at particular topics. He's done a really great series recently where he just looks at a muscle group like the shoulders or the back.
Oh,
and he
sure.
evaluates every exercise he's ever seen recommended for that muscle group and does a tier list.
Ah, love that. So he's like a proper YouTuber as well, doing tier lists and stuff.
He's really good because like he puts a lot of stuff in A tier, where I think the classic thing with tier list is like, no, nothing's in S, only this makes S tier.
Yeah.
And he's really good because he's really like realistic, and he's like, no, there are a bunch of different ways you can exercise a muscle in a really good way.
Yeah.
Here's like 5 to choose from. And I found it really helpful because the routine that I was using, there were some exercises I was doing that just like weren't working for my body. They were flaring up my shoulder, which is injured at the moment.
Has been for a while.
For 2 years at this point, at least. And yeah, it was really good to see some of his recent videos have made me go, now that I know that there are these 3 other exercises that are equivalent in strength to this one, that will work better for my body, I'm just going to swap them. So I swapped like 4 exercises recently.
Have you felt a difference?
I haven't done any of them yet. This was just the other day.
You just switched it over in your
just
plan.
swapped them in my plan, but I'm really excited to do them.
Or maybe when we come back after 2 weeks, that can be your planeswalk to see
I can check
Yeah.
back in with everyone. I've also really enjoyed Dr. Mike Israetel, I should say, of Renaissance Periodization. I recommend only his channel, Renaissance Periodization. He has another channel where he talks about philosophy, and he has a doctorate in exercise science and only that. Do not look at his philosophy stuff.
There's a real weird crossover with fitness and lifestyle kind of coaches.
Yeah.
That they then believe that they have the authority to make grandiose statements about all of life and all of the human experience.
It's also just this like this very bro-y way of looking at the world of like I mean, we talked about it when we looked at like Stoic philosophy. You know, Stoic philosophy is such a bro-y philosophy because people are like, yes, there is in fact nothing I can do about the world and I must weather the storm. And it's like, or you could make a difference maybe, you know? Like
I think I spoke about it if you're interested in this, go listen to our Philosophy of Green episode.
Definitely.
Because me and Walt both actually really love Stoic philosophy, but the original Stoics, Marcus Aurelius, these guys, because modern Stoics really have twisted it into I never should show emotion. I should, and the word Stoic has now become this like vision of a person that is like unmovable as an emotional rock kind of thing. And I think that's twisted what this philosophy of how you should live your life is about.
Yeah. Well, I would argue that the people who are talking about Stoicism these days are just not practicing it.
No, they don't.
They just find the 4 things that they like being a boulder. And look, it aligns really well with the way people talk about going to the gym, right? Like, you must persist. Become stronger by challenging adversity. Yeah. It's a really bro-y philosophy. And anyway, so yes, do not check out his other content. But Dr. Mike Israetel, his stuff on Renaissance Periodization is very scientific. It's got a good backing. But Jeff Nippert is just like the king in my mind of fitness on YouTube. So yeah, highly, highly recommend.
Good stuff. I like the fitness stuff. We've done Commander in relation to the gym before.
That's true.
So it's good to see that you're still...
Paperweights. That's right.
That was a good episode. Go check that out while we're on our break.
Yeah, that's another good one to check out. Definitely. Well, we'll see you on Friday the 11th for another transmission from the Space Commanders.
For a little while, goodbye, Commander players.